Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 292. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to cover on today's show about Assange's extradition, updates on the war in Ukraine, and news on Afghanistan. So please share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version. Follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. And you could donate to the show at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Crypto. All that information in the show notes page. You can also support the show by supporting our sponsor, Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. That saves you 20% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kitback. Those kitbacks are really important for the show. It helps us cover the cost of running the show. And so if you are a CBD user and you like the show, think about trying the products at Paloma Verde so you could help out your favorite podcast while you're helping yourself live a healthier, better life. The products at Paloma Verde, everything I've tried has been absolutely high quality. It has worked as I expected to. My personal favorite is the sports cream, but any product you get Paloma Verde, all the lab test results are right there on their website, so you know that you're getting the exact amount of CBD that's listed on the bottle. Great high quality CBD products that can help you live a better life. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, now let's get into the episode. The first story we have to talk about today is the extradition of Julian Assange. And just for a quick update on what's happening, kind of his status right now is that Assange is kind of about to be extradited to the United States. His legal team has some more appeals, but I think we are getting to the point where this is coming up. The UK in Home Secretary Priti Patel went ahead and approved his extradition, and now his legal team is going to appeal to the High Court. But we haven't seen the High Court be particularly amenable to the Julian Assange case, and so I'm not particularly optimistic about Assange being able to go that road. Now, one thing that could happen is Australia could get involved and prevent this. Assange is an Australian citizen, and you can imagine that if the UK was about to extradite an American journalist who had published information that was classified by the Australian government, but nonetheless embarrassing for the Australian government, and they were trying to arrest Washington Post reporter or editor or something over this. Obviously, the Americans would prevent the UK from extraditing that journalist, either by a private campaign or a public one. And so on the last show, we got this story from the Sydney Morning Herald that the new Australian government, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, took over in May, has been more amenable to Assange's case, and in December said enough is enough on the issue, and we got kind of a similar statement from his foreign minister on Friday. And so it seems like what the Australian government is willing to do is that when certain people talk with the U.S. government, they're willing to say, like, hey, we don't like what's going on with this Assange issue. You should send them back to Australia. My guess is the U.S. shrugs their shoulders and everybody moves on with the meeting. And so now there's some effort to get Albanese to make a public statement on the issue, and he has rejected that call. This from Dave DeCamp on June 20th at antiwar.com. Australian Prime Minister rejects call to intervene in Assange's case. Australia's new Prime Minister has rejected calls for him to publicly demand Washington drop its extradition request of WikiLeaks founder and Australian citizen Julian Assange. The British Home Secretary Priti Patel approved of Friday's Assange extradition to the United States, where he faces up to 175 years in prison on charges of espionage for exposing U.S. war crimes. Assange can appeal the ruling, and his legal team plans to do so, but the new Australian government has ruled out putting public pressure on President Biden to drop the charges. Speaking with reporters in Australia on Monday, the Prime Minister declined to say whether or not he has spoken with Biden about Assange, and also criticized people who are putting public pressure on him to do so. He basically said that, look, that's not how diplomacy works. I'm not going to put public pressure on Biden. Now, I do think that's how diplomacy works. I think if the Australian government was saying that, hey, the Americans are trying to charge one of our citizens for being a journalist, that this would be very important. To call out Biden for continuing to wage Trump's war on journalism would be extremely important, but they're not doing that in Australia. They're just making some minor protests behind the scenes, and so this isn't going to help anything. Now, this is a little bit more than what the previous government, Scott Morrison, was doing, but unless I think Australia is willing to put serious pressure on Washington, then this probably won't happen. Now, one of the other issues with all of this is probably the AUKUS agreement. Australia, UK, US agreed to share nuclear technology, particularly nuclear-powered submarines, and so with that agreement, my guess is the U.S. will leverage that if Australia really starts to try to put pressure on the U.S., which, Australia should prioritize journalism over nuclear-powered submarines, but that's unlikely to have what's going to happen. So really want to talk about this because I feel like it, in some respects, cuts against what I was, covering on the last show with the Sydney Morning Herald story. However, I think it's just, giving a little bit more of a nuanced and a deeper look at the policies here of the new Australian government. Now, I do want to mention that I'm not really going to go into and cover what Assange's legal team is working on right now as this starts to unfold in court. I definitely will cover it, but Kevin Gosztola is doing really good work on that if anybody wants to look into it. All right, maybe the most important story I have today, and I know this is a little bit nuanced and tedious, but I think this is really, really important, is the situation in Lithuania. Now, on the last show, I mentioned that Lithuania banned sanctioned items from being able to travel from Russia to the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which is on the Baltic Sea. And so anyways, the first thing I will say, even if you're just, listening to the show right now, even if you're driving, maybe when you get home tonight or on your smartphone later, just take a second and Google map of the Baltic Sea. I'll put one up on the screen right here, the one in Dave DeCamp's article, just so people could kind of get an idea of, what countries you would have to pass through to get goods from Moscow to Lithuania. Now, I think the traditional route is to go through Belarus, through Lithuania, but, the Kaliningrad is sandwiched on the Baltic Sea between Poland and Lithuania. So could you go through Poland? Obviously, Russia has water access to the Black Sea. Kaliningrad is on the Black Sea, and so can you just move the goods by water or by air? But Lithuania has also cut off its airspace to Russian planes, and so Dave gives a pretty good breakdown in this article, what's going on, what the Russian reaction to this is. And the title of his article is Russia Demands Lithuania Lift Ban on Transit of Goods to Kaliningrad. And then the Russian Foreign Ministry on Monday demanded that Lithuania lift all restrictions on the shipment of goods to the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which is sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania on the Baltic Sea. Lithuania announced last week that it was banning the transport of sanctioned goods through its territory, which the governor of the Russian exclave estimates will impact 50% of all goods that aren't transported by rail. He did mention that what the exclave and what Moscow are going to try to work on is a deal where they're going to ship more goods that are sanctioned, and then they'll use rail for the goods that aren't sanctioned. But of course, things are put along rail lines for certain reasons, and are transited by rail. And so it's not like it's just going to be the same to switch things over. That I think there's going to be a little bit of some harsh logistical, at least, realities to this Lithuanian move. So Russia is saying that they're going to respond to this, not being very direct on how they're going to do that. I don't see Lithuania reversing this move. And so as we see how Russia is responding, we will be able to better understand how this is going to escalate. But I do think we're going to see some serious escalation here. Another very escalatory move is the governor of Russian-controlled Crimea has said that 3 people were injured and 7 are missing after Ukraine fired on 3 oil drilling platforms in the Black Sea off the Crimean Peninsula. I believe that only one of these platforms were hit, and from doing some reading, it doesn't sound like they recovered the 7 missing people yet, which is very much not a good sign. The U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland made a visit to Ukraine to talk about war crimes. This from Dave DeCamp on June 21st. U.S. Attorney General visits Ukraine, throws support behind investigation of alleged Russian war crimes. In the latest high-level U.S. visit to Ukraine, Attorney General Merrick Garland made an appearance in the country on Tuesday and pledged U.S. support for investigating alleged Russian war crimes. Garland met with Ukrainian Prosecutor General near Lviv and announced the formation of a team to help Ukraine with criminal prosecutions, evidence, and forensics. There is no hiding places for war crimes. The U.S. Department of Justice will pursue every avenue of accountability for those who commit war crimes and other atrocities in Ukraine. The ICC, International Criminal Court, has opened an investigation into alleged Russian war crimes and has sent a team of investigators to Ukraine. The U.S. has pledged to help international efforts, although Washington is not a party to the ICC and has tried to obstruct the court's investigation into war crimes allegedly committed by the U.S. and its allies. The Trump administration sanctioned ICC officials for investigating the U.S. war in Afghanistan. The measures were reversed by the Biden administration, but Biden officials made it clear they still are opposed to the investigation, as well as the ICC's probes into the Israeli investigations in the West Bank and Gaza. We continue to disagree strongly with the ICC's actions and relating to the investigations in Afghanistan and Palestine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said. So, we also have Americans captured in Ukraine. I believe 2 or 3 Americans are captured at this point. It seems that there's definite confirmation on 2. Russia has suggested that the 2 veterans could face the death penalty. They are, soldier veterans, but now they are, fighting as mercenaries or whatever you want to call them in Ukraine. The Russian spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says it depends on the investigation. And that the vets could face the same fate as 2 American, or British and a Moroccan who were sentenced to death earlier this month. He wanted to say, those guys on the battlefield were firing at our military guys. They were endangering their lives. There will be a court and there will be a court decision. They should be punished, adding that they were soldiers of fortune. Now, I want to add one thing here, which is, kind of almost seems like a conflicting narrative coming out of the White House, because the U.S. is so concerned about supporting Ukraine. We had to pay high gas prices to support the Ukrainians. The price of inflation's because we had to support Ukraine in Putin's war. And we had to send $50 billion in weapons to Ukraine. But Americans themselves should not travel to Ukraine to join the fight there, according to the president. The U.S. is making it sound like these men traveling to Ukraine are fighting against Putin and Hitler and the Nazis, right? And that's just not the reality of the situation at all. And so the narrative around it makes it seem like it would be a very noble thing to go and fight in Ukraine, but here the president is telling you not to go. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Biden is planning a trip to Ukraine this coming week, or not, excuse me. Biden is not going to Ukraine this coming week. He is going to Europe. He is going to Germany on Saturday for a G7 meeting, and then in Spain to attend a NATO meeting. Now, the one thing worth noting here is even though Biden says he is not going to Ukraine, is that the White House would never telegraph that. And so maybe, if they are actually considering it, Biden giving a definite no would help to make the security situation possible for him to get there versus him being ambiguous about it and potentially accidentally creating a rumor that he might want to go. Dave DeCamp covers a very important potential development within the EU. He writes, the European Union's Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, wants the bloc to drop the requirement of having to gain the approval of all 27 members for foreign policy decisions. The EU recently declared its support for Ukrainian and Moldovan membership, and all 27 members need to approve. There's also been sanctions issues where Hungary has held up sanctions on the EU, has been able to get exemptions from the EU on having to commit to those sanctions. And so I think they are trying very hard to be able to make decisions without every last small nation that has ties with Moscow objecting to it. Hungary has been able to block sanctions on the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. All right, now on to my article from yesterday, June 21st, at the Libertarian Institute. Turkey grows cautious of arms sales to Ukraine as Ankara plans to host Kiev and Moscow for talks. A top Turkish official said Ankara is now much more careful about weapon sales to Ukraine. The head of Turkey's Defense Intelligence Agency warned the arms transfers could jeopardize Ankara's neutrality and its ability to facilitate negotiations. Turkey plans to host talks with Kiev and Moscow to alleviate global food shortages. Turkey hosted several rounds of talks between Russia and Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that a proposal made by Kiev during a meeting in Istanbul was suitable for a deal. That meeting occurred in March. However, negotiations between Moscow and Kiev broke off in April. While discussing Ankara's role in a potential peace deal with the Wall Street Journal, Ishmael Demir, the president of Ukraine's defense industry agency and a top official in President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government, noted weapon shipments to Ukraine were still ongoing, but Ankara is increasingly cautious of its role in diplomacy. And this is what he said. There are things going on, but I'm not in position to say. We are much more careful. Turkey is the only country, I guess, that can give a call to both parties and call them to the peace table. How can you do this if you send tens of thousands of weapons to one side, he said. And this is maybe the most insightful thing I have heard a NATO official say. And how the hell is coming from the head of Turkey's defense industry is absolutely shocking and terrifying that this is the only guy that seems to be able to say it. You have the foreign secretaries like Liz Truss in the UK and Antony Blinken in the US, who are the most hawkish people. And here you have the person who you would assume in Turkey who would be most interested in shipping arms is saying hey guys, Turkey plays a role in diplomacy, so maybe we shouldn't take a side here. Turkey has sold Ukraine its Bayraktar TB2 drones. Ukraine deployed the armed drones in the Donbass region before the Russian invasion on February 24th. Since Russia escalated the war, Kiev claims it deployed the drones to sink Russian ships. Turkey is not planning to host diplomats from Russia and Ukraine. Turkey is planning to host diplomats from Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul in the coming weeks. Ankara hopes the talks will net an agreement that will allow ships to reach Ukrainian ports to move grain. Erdogan and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres may attend the meeting. A source said that that the plan expects to create 3 corridors from Ukraine's Black Sea port city of Odessa under Kiev supervision, and food from Russia and Ukraine can be shipped from there. The source believes 30 to 35 million tons of grain could be shipped from the port in the next 6 to 8 months if a deal is reached. And so that would be absolutely huge, and we will see if the West is interested in negotiating at all. Turkey also held talks with Finland and Sweden at the NATO summit, and I guess they were trilateral talks. The Secretary General called the talks constructive. I think Turkey said that nothing was conclusive, but talks would continue. So, I don't know, that really doesn't sound like good news, just doesn't sound like bad news either. All right, next article I have today from myself is titled, U.S. Considering Letting Tajikistan Keep Abandoned Afghan Aircraft, Increasing Special Operation Ties. U.S. Central Commander General Michael Kurilla said the U.S. is considering transferring aircraft that once belonged to the Afghan army to the armed forces of the Republic of Tajikistan. The aircraft was flown to Tajikistan by Afghan soldiers during the fall of the U.S.-backed government in Kabul. Over the weekend, Kurilla traveled to the Central Asian country for a high-level summit with the country's president, Minister of Defense, and at the meeting, Kurilla said, I came here to reaffirm our commitment to the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Tajikistan. Strong Tajik borders are critical to the security of the entire Central Asian region. A statement relayed through the U.S. Embassy reported that Kurilla thanked the Tajikistan for maintaining the defunct Afghan Army's aircraft. The United States is working with the Tajik government to determine the best way to effectively use and maintain the aircraft. He continued, our hope is to hand over all or some of the aircraft to the Tajik government. Kurilla said that he could not offer a timeline and that the U.S. military equipment could not be returned to Afghanistan because they do not belong to the Taliban. Of course, you would assume that the issue, if you give it to Tajikistan, is that it doesn't belong to Tajikistan either, but, you know, logic is what it is at the Pentagon. A CENTCOM press release on the meeting said security cooperation with Tajikistan focuses primarily on counterterrorism and border security operations. CENTCOM provides Tajikistan training equipment and infrastructure to defend its border with Afghanistan. Kurilla offered increased training ties between the U.S. and Tajik Special Forces. Partner Special Forces training represents an area in which we can work together to beat back extremist groups and defend your border. Aiding the Tajik military appears out of line with Joe Biden's stated foreign policy of dividing the world into autocracies versus democracies. The State Department Human Rights Report from 2021 on Tajikistan says, Tajikistan is an authoritarian state dominated politically since 1992 by President Omilia Rahman. Significant human rights issues include credible reports of forced disappearances on behalf of the government, torture and abuse of detainees by security forces, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrests and detention, political prisoners, politically motivated reprisals against individuals in another country, including kidnapping or violence, serious problems with independence of judiciary, arbitrary and unlawful interference in privacy, punishment with family members for offenses allegedly committed by an individual, serious restrictions on free expression in media, including violence or threats of violence against journalists. And so it's absolutely crazy how in Russia these crimes appear to be either just as bad or maybe even worse than anything you could allege Vladimir Putin of doing, and yet we're isolating Vladimir Putin for being an authoritarian Hitler, and we are arming the Tajik military. This seems quite contradictory. The Taliban released 5 British nationals from custody in a statement that was kind of gross. The Taliban said that they were detained for breaching Afghans' laws and traditions, and that they were then handed over to the UK after they admitted that they did wrong and promised not to do it again. All right, some Israel news before we wrap up. This article from Dave DeCamp, very, very important, titled, Israel Reveals It's Building a U.S.-Backed Regional Military Alliance Against Iran. Israel Defense Minister Benny Gantz said Monday that Israel has been working with regional countries on a U.S.-backed anti-Iranian military alliance that focuses on integrated air defense systems dubbed the Middle East Air Defense Alliance. And I think if everybody will remember back when me and Will Porter wrote the article on the new Defend Act. Defend is an acronym, of course, and what that act says is that the U.S. needs to work to provide, I think, 9 or 10 Middle East countries other than Israel, all the allied Arab states in Iraq, that they should get upgraded air defense systems and to figure out how to do that. So I think this is a very much a complex strategy that's being pushed on multiple levels right now, and it seems like many people who are part of the foreign policy establishment are on board. The revelation demonstrates the growing military cooperation between Israel and Washington's Arab allies since the start of the U.S.-brokered Abraham Accords saw Israel normalize relations with the UAE and Bahrain. All right. Gantz said, over the past year, I have been leading an extensive program together with my partners at the Pentagon and the U.S. administration that will strengthen the cooperation between Israel and countries in the region. Gantz would elaborate on the countries involved in the alliance, but claimed that it has already been used to thwart Iranian attacks. And I do believe it's the 6 GCC countries with, some complications and asterisks in there for Yemen and Oman particularly, and then I think it was Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and maybe one more country that it also wanted to add to that list to help with missile defense systems and things like that. Now, my guess is, again, about half these countries won't end up being involved, Iraq, Yemen, Oman, but some of them will, and particularly the more important regional powerhouses, Saudi, UAE, Jordan, Kuwait. So, let's see. Since the signing of the Abraham Accords in September 2020, Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain have begun participating in the U.S.-led military exercises. Earlier this year, Israel signed an agreement with Bahrain meant to boost security ties. Israel has dispatched the military officials to be stationed in the Gulf country. I think this is ramping up. I think it's going to be a serious issue, especially as Israel tends to get more hawkish as it goes through elections. And guess what? We got more Israeli elections coming up here. So the government of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has collapsed. The Israeli leaders, the leaders of the Israeli government coalition have submitted a bill to dissolve the parliament. The leaders would be Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, and Lapid will be the prime minister of the caretaker government until elections happen in the fall. And then this is from Lapid. After exhausting all efforts to stabilize the coalition, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid have decided to submit the bill dissolving parliament for next week. Netanyahu sees this as a real opportunity, saying it's clear to everyone that this government is the biggest failure in the history of Israel. It's at the end of its road. Now, as I've been warning, there was an escalation in Israel where rockets were exchanged between Palestinians, and then Israel responded with F-35 strikes on Gaza. But Israel carried out a raid, killed 3 Palestinians in a car. A couple missiles were fired, or rockets were fired from Gaza. It was unclear who actually carried it out, but then Israel responded by hitting 4 targets in Gaza that were Hamas. Now, just a couple more stories on Israel before I wrap up here. Israel carried out a couple investigations that's now wrapped up into the death of Abu Akleh, Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera journalist who was murdered by an Israeli soldier. As far as the funeral goes, where they beat the protesters, the pallbearers, the mourners involved in the funeral, almost causing them to draw the casket. The police chief said that there was misconduct, but no discipline would be held. And then they also concluded their investigation into the killing of Abu Akleh with no actual information publicly of what happened, but apparently nobody's going to be held accountable for that as well. And then the U.S. has told Israel not to provoke the Palestinians ahead of the upcoming Biden visit to Israel scheduled for about 3 weeks from now. So we'll see if that happens or not. I have a suspicion that it won't. All right, I will wrap up the show there for today. Hope everybody's enjoying it. Please share the show if you can. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and you can always find it at antiwar.com. Thanks, everyone.